Well, the First Ministers are scheduled to meet in Saskatoon on Monday to get the ball rolling on some of those projects, and we know Carney will be presenting them with the outline of legislation to get that process started. We're going to start there with our Friday Party Insiders. Joining me from our Ottawa studio, Greg McEachern is a former Liberal ministerial advisor, Melanie Richer is a former communications director for the NDP, and Fred Delory is a former Conservative campaign manager. Good to see you from afar, but good to see you nonetheless. Fred, let's start with you. It was a week fit for a king. How do you think it is at the end of the week in terms of any kind of value, lift, and momentum that came from Charles and Camilla being in the country?
Yeah, look, I thought it was excellent to have the monarch, the sovereign, open this parliament. This is a contentious time in Canada where we have this existential threat to the south. The word sovereign in his title and how we refer to him, and it gives us our sovereignty, I think is an important symbol. So I think it was a masterstroke to get him here. I do wish we didn't take every 50 years to get the monarch to come to our country to do the speech from the throne. I think it should be way more regular, not every Parliament, but it should be a more custom thing. And it was great to see the patriotism and the Canadian pride. We were talking about it earlier before we went on the show here about how the crowds were just amazing. I think it was a good start. People have a lot of hope for this government and what they can accomplish. We need a lot of things in this country to get right and to fix. You can't help but, obviously, as a Conservative, I want to see this government succeed. It's not about politics. It's about what's good for the country. And, I've got a family of 4 kids. I want to see things go right here, that they can have opportunities when they're older. So I am hopeful that, the things that were in the speech from the throne are achievable and that this government can get it done. And that's what we're going to be seeing over the next few years is, can they get it done?
Mel, what's your take on it? Right now it is... It's promises, not actual tangible things, but that's the nature of a speech from the throne. But having the king do it and sort of, again, the Prime Minister's been the Prime Minister for about 80 days, the Oval Office, France, the UK, Rome, the Vatican, and now the king in Ottawa. What do you make of this week?
Right. I'll pick up a little bit on what Fred said. The feeling that you could really tell in Ottawa on Tuesday was actually quite special. And it wasn't necessarily, folks who, are big fans of the Royals. I'm sure some of those folks were in the crowd. But what I could see is folks who were really proud to be Canadian and proud that the King was here to show, President Trump that we weren't American or we weren't, lining up to be American. So that is really what stuck with me this week is how nice it was to see folks cheer for the anthem. You mentioned cheering for the Prime Minister and just be proud of being Canadian and really proud of being Canadian, but also proud of being kind of all together as it relates for how the actual content or the actual words in the speech and the ideas in the speech, how that plays out. I think Fred's right. I think we're going to see what that looks like over the next few years. I do think the language that the Prime Minister continues to use about how quickly this is all going to happen, I think is maybe a little bit dangerous is maybe a dramatic word to use, but it may get him into a little bit of trouble. I think governing is not quick. And I think we may see that in the House a little bit. I also think there's a reason that some of these processes are in place to make sure that the proper consultation is being done with Indigenous groups. So I'm interested to see what that looks like next week after he meets with the premiers. But I'm a big believer in don't overpromise because I think that's gonna hurt him quickly if he's not able to show folks in a real way that his ideas are making people's lives better and are reducing our reliance on the United States. So that's maybe the one thing that I'm paying attention to and how that shapes up next week.
Well, look, I actually do want to dive in deeper on that in a little bit. But I want to just get Greg, big monarchist, right, Greg, growing up in Cape Breton? Is that the Irish Catholics I grew up with in Newfoundland who fled from Ireland, have a mixed view on this whole thing. But even, I think, people with a streak of Fenianism in them were kind of interested post-Donald Trump to have things like this happening this week.
Yeah, I'm only half Irish Catholic, half Scottish Catholic.
Well then.
The conflict. Look, I don't know if I'm a monarchist, but I think I'm a constitutional monarchist.
Right.
And I think sometimes we don't appreciate the system of checks and balances that we have. And that's a good thing because we haven't had to exercise it in Canada for a long time, the king being a fair for, quite a long time ago. But we also, I thought Fred's comments about how well received the King was here and how we should have the monarch read the speech from the throne more often, it tells you how far we've come, because there was a process where for a long time governors general were not Canadian, were not appointed by a Canadian government. We've moved in that direction a long time ago. But I also think that there is because of pop culture, because of media, because of things like Netflix's The Crown or the movie The Queen, there's an appreciation that for many, many years, King Charles's mother met weekly with every prime minister. And you think about that process, that as a monarch to prime minister, that they had that, for the younger prime ministers like Tony Blair, they had that to access. I think it was good for Canada, but I also think it was good for King Charles. There was a challenge for his mother being in the shadow of her mother, and I grew up with my grandmother, and her and her friends could be stunt doubles for the Queen Mother. There was a huge adoration for that woman because of the ties through World War II, and then following that, the Queen Elizabeth kind of came into her own. And I think based on some of the media that I've seen of the reporting in the UK, this may have also been an advantage for King Charles. And David, the final thing, thank God the weather was good. We deserved it.
Yes,
it's been a really long May. And, I have to say Canada, Ottawa looked really good.
Yeah. When you spend 5 hours sitting in the sun in a suit doing television, you could have used a lighter breeze. Look, I have a great affection for the Queen Mother, too, mostly because we both love our gin. But, Fred, let's pick up on something that Mel mentioned. Expectations management. Mark Carney is managing expectations sky high.
Yeah.
He is, they're above the Golden Dome, in terms of pace and scale and promise. And, I think the premiers are expecting a whole lot of stuff on Monday, and industry is expecting it too. What do you make of just the runway that he's laid out for all the people he needs to work with?
It's incredibly ambitious and aggressive. Expectations are incredibly high, and it's why he's prime minister, though, at the same time. People were expecting a lot from him. People didn't know who Mark Carney was a number of months ago. They had an idea of who he was, and there was this resume, this great resume he had as a central banker in both Canada and England and chair of a major asset firm. It was about, the thought and the idea of Mark Carney, and I think that was the narrative, and who the Liberals really ran was the idea of Mark Carney. So he had to set expectations high to be able to win that election. But now they are sky high, and they're going to be incredibly difficult to achieve. There's a number of big issues. The two biggest issues, he's promised to get rid of interprovincial trade barriers by July 1st. That was the initial promise. Now, I understand he meant federal barriers, not the actual provinces, but so it's a smaller scale. But expectations were that they were going to be gone, and they're not at that provincial level. It'll be at the federal part of it that'll be gone, or supposed to be gone. But now we're hearing that, no, now they're saying they'll just introduce legislation before July 1st. That is a huge step back. And I think, people are going to be wondering, is he going to be able to meet these expectations?
Fred, just on that, though, isn't that a function of being a minority prime minister as opposed to a majority prime minister? Like, you can't promise that Parliament will pass something by a certain date.
But he did promise it. He said he would do this.
Right, during the election when he was campaigning for a majority, but the reality is now that he's 3 seats short, right? You know what I mean? Like,
sure, but
it's a process thing.
the Bloc have said they'll give them a year to and support them in legislation. So it sounds to me like it's a working
details on
majority.
that promise, though, when you're getting rid of internal trade barriers and how it might affect Quebec. But yeah, I take your point.
If it's a minority parliament, what he could easily do is make it a confidence motion. If this is an important piece of legislation that he campaigned on, he was elected to, make it a confidence motion. And I guarantee you, at least 7 members, maybe of a certain party, won't show up to vote, and it'll pass. So he can do this. If you can't use the excuse he didn't have a majority government, so he can't do all of the stuff he promised.
Well, sure, but we'll see, right, when the legislation comes, what it is and what kind of a reception it gets in Parliament. But Mel, it seems to me the projects is a bigger issue, right? In terms of moving from delay to delivery, from promise to project, and there's going to be in some sort of shared decision-making process in Saskatoon, the picking of winners and losers on certain projects and certain regions and certain provinces, and that's when it's all going to start to get a little bit tricky. Like, I know it's only going to be the initial wave on Monday. But people want to be in that first wave, and not everybody's going to be.
Absolutely, and hearing your interview that you were doing with Premier Holt earlier, we tried to put everything on the table that we thought could happen quickly and would be most beneficial to the province. Everybody's done that, right? So if some folks are getting a yes and some folks are not getting a yes, particularly those who you're already seeing some tensions. I'm obviously not expecting for him to say no to Premier Smith or Premier Moe on a lot of stuff because of those tensions that the Prime Minister has stated he wants to fix. But yeah, if folks come away from that not pleased, then you can just appreciate that the people in that province probably won't be pleased either. So yeah, the expectations management, the timeline, he kept talking about 2 years. That's great to hear as a concept, but unless you can actually make that happen, hopefully, because I'm not trying to go to an election anytime soon, we're not up for an election within 2 years. But if you're not able to prove that and to prove the process or the progress on that process within a few months, I would say, I think it's just really tricky language to be using so forcefully, particularly because we're not in an election right now. You're now in the business of governing. And I think, I hope the feeling that we saw on Tuesday with people lasts for a really long time, as somebody who cares about the future of our country. But I think the reality is if that timeline that he has to actually start showing that he knows what he's doing and he's doing those things, I think people that there is a risk where we could end up being, going back to those maybe a little bit more divisive times that we saw not that long ago. And I think that's, the risk here of being so forceful in the language that he's using.
Well, Greg, look, with Mel, talking about an election and Fred talking about a confidence vote, it just my plea is at least let the Power and Politics team and Rosie let us have a summer vacation before we go back to something like this. It's been a year, but Greg, I wonder. I have no special insight into what Mark Carney is planning. I only met him for the first time on Tuesday when we did that interview, but his answer on pipeline had some qualifications in it, right? That it's not 100% where his headspace is at, though he's open to it. It feels like the economic corridor idea the Western premiers are talking about is where something can go, but it's tough to fast track a pipeline if it goes through multiple provincial jurisdictions, and not all of those jurisdictions are necessarily on board, right? So there's a chance here to get some unity with movement, but there is a downside risk here if it's not sort of in the right stuff. So what's your sense of what needs to come out of Saskatoon for this propulsion to continue and for it to matter to people?
Well, the other aspect of that is who is safe in their jurisdiction and who is facing an election soon, and have the attitudes of their province, for example, take a look at Quebec, have attitudes changed recently as a result of the threat of Trump and tariffs and the need for this. I'm not going to say there's anything, declarative, but we've certainly heard noises that people seem to be more aware of what Canadians are, told. The federal parties in the election. So some premiers may be very safe. I would be very surprised, for example, if Scott Moe runs in another election. But he's not going to face an election in a while. But he's got to take a look at, when does he want to, if he's not going to run again, does he step back? I'm wondering in Alberta, there was some polling this week, but I understand that there's further polling in the field about how Albertans feel about the direction of their province and the actions of their premier. Will that color, what that premier is doing? So there's a lot of other additional things with that, David. I found it fascinating to look at the wish lists of premiers, the ones that we were able to find out about, because they're also trying to balance what they're able to do for their own province, but at the same time, what is, as Mel said, what is doable quickly.
Yeah, so on that, Fred, I take your point on the promise on interprovincial trade, right? And trying to hit that July 1 deadline, and we'll see if they get there. But on the project side, my sense from the conversation with the Prime Minister on Tuesday, to borrow his phrase, he wants something that catalyzes, right? Is the word he likes to use. But I think it's got to be pretty large-scale stuff in some cases that they want to really nail, which is why I think this Western Economic Corridor, the Port of Churchill, all of that, that feels like something that's going to be in that first wave of thing, and that's multiple provinces and a move to the north, and also trade channels for multiple core industries. I mean, how do you think that plays, something like that in the West with sort of the challenges that have been there with Alberta and Saskatchewan?
Yeah, look, we've had 10 years of a government that has been anti-productivity and anti-big project. So if we can have a government that can come in and work to try to achieve this, I think it'll work well. It is going to be tough, going from the 5-year process to 2. They're going to have to figure out a lot of issues and figure out a way to do that. But it's certainly something, like if they can show growth here, this could be a winning issue for them that they could be rewarded with in terms of public opinion. But people need to feel it. They need to see that something's actually being built and being built big in this country, because that's what the expectation is right now for Prime Minister Carney. And it goes the other way, of course, if it doesn't get going, if it's just more talk, more consultations, years and years of chatter and nothing going on, he's going to feel that too. So there is risk reward here. But again, Canadians, I think, did support him under the belief he's someone who can get things done. And now we've got to see if he's going to be able to do it.
Well, Mel, I wonder, going back to your point about the language, getting things done, getting things built at a speed and scale we have not seen, right? I heard some chatter in Ottawa this week, people saying like, oh, this hasn't happened, that hasn't. He's been Prime Minister for 80 days. The election was 30-odd days ago. So there's a bit of slower roll on that, I think. But it's marrying the timelines of what is fast for a project with what is fast for the expectations of people's brains corrupted by the speed of social media. Do you know what I mean? And I wonder how you have to balance that, like whether him saying getting something done at historical speed, I mean, that could be 18 months from now if it's a big project. Do you know what I mean? In just terms of lining up the labor, the materials, and all of these things. So that's where the balance needs to be struck too, I think.
Totally, and the expectation in somebody's brain of, if you're telling me something's happening in 2 years, I expect that is going to be done, and I might be going to be used, or I'm going to be able to use it or benefit from it in 2 years' time, which we know is not really realistic, right? So the language, I do think is really important. I do think it's a communications exercise and an example of where the previous government wasn't able to get ahead of themselves because they weren't able to communicate to people in a way that people understood and felt like they were being understood. I think you're right, Fred, that folks are giving him. People voted for Mark Carney because they thought that he was somebody who could get something done. I think that folks will believe that for a little bit. I think they will give him grace for a little bit, but I don't think that grace is going to last forever. So I do think the words that he uses and the way that he's qualifying, what is it, process approval in 2 years? Is it everybody on board, shovels in the ground in 2 years? Is it? I just think that the way that those things are qualified, I think, is probably important.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's kind of two things, Greg, right? There's these national projects are going to start designating, and then there's just an overall framework that all projects are approved within 2 years. But these new ones, it's going to be, once you get this designation, that essentially counts as the permit. So the money can line up and business can get going. So, what do you think the Prime Minister needs to do in terms of managing expectations coming out Monday? Or does he just need to use this runway he's got and push every lever of power he has to keep making progress?
Well, I mean, I do want to acknowledge what you've been covering, since the start of the show, which is that there are wildfires going on in the western provinces while they're there as well. So I am curious to see how that is going to impact, having provincial emergencies as they're talking, keeping that in mind. But I think the premiers know, what we've been saying during this entire panel, which is Canadians have sent a message. They're looking for more serious efforts at both the federal and provincial levels. They're not big fans of being non-Canadian. I'm trying to talk around some of the Premier of Alberta's outreach prior to or during the election in the United States in that style. I don't think Canadians want that, and I think that premiers from the other provinces know that the people they represent don't want that either. So I don't think we often saw a very binary effort between the previous prime minister and premiers, or even when the FTP of the health ministers, when the federal, provincial, territorial ministers met. Sometimes it could be very contentious. I don't think anyone wants to see that coming out of this. I think they want to see productive ideas. But, quite frankly, I think the Prime Minister needs to get through this session of the House, get to whatever deadlines need to be met by July 1st, and then take the summer to step back and kind of reconsider how things went in his first days in government, and then start planning for the fall.
Right. I'm not sure that he's going to do that. I think he wants to go, so that when he gets to this budget, he's already got a bunch of things moving and decisions made so that they can bake it into the fiscal plan. And there's this European stuff, there's NATO stuff, there's defense spending. I don't think they're getting a summer off, even if Parliament closes. But let's just do a quick round on what has happened with Parliament, because MPs returned to the House of Commons this week, and while there are many new faces in the chamber, there is one that is notably absent.
Hey, I'd love to be in there. It's a great place. I love the House of Commons. I love the excitement and the thrill. And I've never really been a spectator of the House. So but I'm going to work hard to earn the opportunity to do it again.
And Pierre Poilievre will get the opportunity to try to do that again, as Alberta Conservative MP Damien Carrick gave his farewell speech in the House yesterday, while a lot of people are giving their first speeches. But before he gives up his seat for the Conservative leader to run in his riding, that will happen in just a couple of weeks from now, the resignation.
Politics needs to be about doing what's best for your country. So to the people of Battle River Crowfoot, you trusted me. I'm asking you to trust me once again, as I ask you to support Pierre Poilievre as he runs in an upcoming by-election in Battle River Crowfoot.
So in this transitional period, Pierre Poilievre has been speaking from outside the House of Commons today, announcing Conservatives will be voting against the government's spending bill.
Conservatives will vote against this $500 billion of inflationary, irresponsible, out-of-control liberal spending. We continue to hold out hope the government will change direction, and that's why we're calling on them to introduce a budget this spring.
Okay, so Fred, they're continuing their call for a budget this spring, saying they're going to vote against the main estimates. You've said the last couple of weeks you think what Pierre Poilievre needs to do is kind of go to ground and do a data-driven analysis on what went wrong and what to do. There's a lot of continuing with what they had done before in a lot of the remarks we heard them, maybe with a slightly different tone. What do you make of this? Are they doing the sort of the introspection you think that needs to happen for a party that increased but still lost?
That's the question I think every Conservative has right now. What is going on? What's happening? Are we doing this? Is it taking place? Because it's not being communicated if it is. And I think that's something that should be happening. We should be aware if there's some kind of review going on and who's leading it. You know, Mr. Poilievre, it's seeing him here, I do think he should be going to ground right now. I don't think he should be doing press conferences. I don't think he should be out there, out front, talking about this. This is not a time or an opportunity to score any political points. You're not going to score them. He should be figuring out what worked in the last campaign and what didn't. That's what his focus should be right now, and then go get elected this summer in Battle River Crowfoot. And you know, my shout out to Damien Carrick for doing what he's doing. He's months away from qualifying for a pension, and he's giving up his seat. And I think that's quite admirable because he believes in his leader and the party and what Poilievre can do as Prime Minister. But I really
if I can interrupt, is what he's doing, is this about securing the leadership? You know what I mean? Is
Right.
that what he's doing about it at this point? Because I don't know if it's still 100% safe or not.
Look, no one's ever 100% safe in their leadership, but I think he has got a very, very solid lock on it. I've not heard any rumblings in any way. No one, people may be critical, as they should be when you don't form government after an election, but I've not heard anyone saying he has to go, he has to leave.
Right.
That's not what's happening here. So I think he has an opportunity to really focus and figure out what's the plan. And look, I'll say I've won campaigns, I've lost campaigns, and when you lose campaigns, it is a painful experience. It is hard to get up in the morning sometimes. When you've been going so long and working so hard to achieve the outcome you want, and when you don't get it, it's so very difficult. And I think he should be not going out there right now. He doesn't need to be out there right now speaking at all. We don't need to see him in Parliament or around the Hill for the next couple of weeks. He should go, figure it out, get re-elected as a candidate in the by-election, and come back in the fall ready to go. And don't look like that defeated person right now making those comments about how, I wish I was still here. I think they're taking the wrong approach on that. Not that it's a big difference maker right now. There's no points to be scored or lost in many ways. But I just think that's what the focus should be, and that's what he should be doing.
Mel, I just wonder what your thoughts on it are. And just before we get there, I just want to say to everyone's going to message me and say, why are you covering Pierre Poilievre? He lost his seat. He is still the leader of the Conservative Party and has enormous control over the second largest caucus in a minority parliament. So, you know, he is a newsworthy figure, so spare me the messages. Mel, but what do you make of it? Like, should he do what Fred is doing and go to ground or go to Battle River Crowfoot, for example? Because, you know, he's probably going to win that, but he's not really out there, it seems. I mean, what do you make of the approach this week from Pierre Poilievre?
You know, if he had something that was like salient or, you know, punchy to say, or something that was really connecting with the mood that people were feeling, I think it would be a different story. I think, you know, I don't know if you said it this way, so I'm not going to say like Fred said, but it kind of sounds a little bit like loser talk. Like he's talking about how he wishes he was in the House. Yeah, he's laughing about it, but it's just kind of circling the problem of, you know, people didn't trust to re-elect you after you've been their MP for 20 years. I don't know that that's the message that I'd want to be passing if I was him. I also don't know that the message is, you know, we're going to vote against Ways and Means, but please put forward a budget. That also doesn't really make sense in my brain. So if he had a message to say that was connecting with how people were feeling, it'd be different. But I don't think that there is a message that he could come up with right now that would connect with folks, because like we were talking about kind of off the top, I think people are giving a lot of grace, and whether they voted for Prime Minister Carney or they didn't, or they like him or not, I think they hope that he's going to do some good things. So in that time, it's really hard for him to come up with something that will connect with folks, or that folks will want to hear. So I agree. Figure out, you know, what didn't go well, because we know that stuff didn't. We know that people didn't necessarily like him or were voting for him because they liked him. So figure all that stuff. Look at the data.
Yeah.
Or not, and then, you know, I'm not going to be too upset about it either. So.
Yeah, you're not in his corner rooting for
No,
him
I'm not
to come back
necessarily.
here,
I'm not. Yeah.
Yeah, not like Greg, the monarchist with the Irish and the Scottish roots. But, you know, Greg, it's interesting, you know, we see this image this week of Mr. Poilievre outside the House of Commons, in the foyer of the House of Commons. We're used to that, but it would only be him. Now we see MPs with him because they have to be with him. Yeah. He needs a member of parliament to escort him in because he lost his seat, right? So I understand the desire to want to be in the narrative and to be in the news cycle, but it is also a reminder that he didn't win his seat and he didn't win the election. And I just wonder if Fred's advice of low profile, sort it out has a bit of weight there.
As a Liberal, put Pierre Poilievre out as much as possible to all those people messaging you more and more and more.
Sending me the messages, Greg, just so you know.
I mean, guys, think about it. Like, this is a good thing for Liberals because he sounds like 2024. And actually, he put out a video where he's got his logo from 22 or 23, which is Pierre Poilievre for Prime Minister. Guys, put that away. That, you know, it didn't work out for you. And in that video, he talks about Justin Trudeau's hair. That's from 10 years ago. So, you know, as a partisan, you know, keep going. As, you know, if I was advising them, you know, everything that Fred just said is 100% true. Look, you know, what would the kids say? Cringe? That was a cringe moment. And I was watching Melissa Lantsman behind him, and you know, I thought of that old, you know, Simpsons joke, you know, blink twice to Interpol, you know, if you need help. She seemed to want to be anyplace else but there. So I do not understand this strategy. It seems forced. That the smile thing is still not really working out, and he's still talking about Justin Trudeau's hair, Mark Carney's hair, things like this. And I think people have moved well beyond that and are concerned with much different things. Look, Poilievre leaving is C. We're at A. B is going to be really interesting. A couple of things happened this week. Quickly, David. There were two Conservative MPs that were determined to run for Speaker on Sunday night. They were still running. On a Monday, they weren't. There has been a lot of chatter about what happened there. And then, you know, has anybody done a plan well or a review? It appears the Toronto Star has, and they've got, you know, 2 parts of a 3-part series out. And some of the treatment that's listed in there of Conservative MPs is quite horrible. So the more time people have in the Conservative caucus to take a look and say, look, our leader doesn't seem to be moving with the changes, a lot of things can happen by this fall.
Yeah, Greg, to correct you, all 3 of them are out. I read them on the plane flying here to Toronto this morning, and Al Theoraj has got some interesting stuff there. And Fred, I just wonder, to give you the last word on this, I mean, there's stories about MP travel being approved. in the Star Report and then canceled after the MP had gone there and being told to fly back right away and having to eat a $12,000 cost. You are seeing MPs doing things we have not seen them do for a couple of years, coming on this show, stopping at going into caucus. It does seem, I don't know if it's a deliberate loosening of the grip there or if it's a shrugging off of the controls that they were prepared to live with when they were up by 20 points.
Yeah, look, I think after an election loss like this, there is a mental reset where there are no rules right now. There is no discipline. There is no focus. There's no core real message right now. And that goes for all opposition parties in many ways. And that's just the nature of politics. That's how that always goes like that after an election. And I think that's one of the reasons why Poilievre needs to go to ground and refocus that and figure out what is the plan. And when you come back in the fall, make sure that discipline, whatever the plan is, whether it's having MPs on the show every week or every day, which I hope they do, that's something they need to figure out and then start enforcing that, because politics is a team sport, and you need leadership though from above to map that out, and I think that's what they need to do this summer.
But on that, Fred, just as this has got to be the last word, do you think he could, and the people around it could reassert that sort of tight level of caucus control, right, after what happened? I just wonder if you think that strength still exists, because MPs have made it clear they like being seen on camera and talking to journalists and being a human being who was elected to a big job rather than, just someone sitting behind one guy in question period every day.
Look, discipline in communications and politics is always an incredible challenge, particularly, I would say, with both Conservative and NDP parties, which are parties that have more concrete values than the Liberals, who can one day say carbon tax is needed or the world we're born, or the next day will, celebrating gas.
You shouldn't have told him it was the last word, David.
I know. That's a rookie mistake by me, telling Fred it's going to be the last word, and then he can take a cheap shot at the other two. But you know what? I'll give you guys the last word next week. And tough luck, Fred. All right, it's good to see you. Greg McEachern, Melanie Richer, and Fred Delory.